Good morning and welcome. I hope that you'll be encouraged by spending a little bit of time together. Again, we're unable to meet in person, but it is a joy for me to be able to prepare a lesson and to share it with you. And this has been a very encouraging lesson for me to put together. It was a lot of fun to think through these things and to prepare them to share with you. And so I pray that you will benefit even a little bit as much as I have. I want to share a couple of very quick announcements. We are continuing to encourage people not to come into the building. If you are local here in Meaford and you need to come in, there's hand sanitizer at the front and back door. Please use it on the way in and on the way out. I want to remind everyone that Edith Williams has been organizing the production, really, of masks, and she's done a number of these. She did have a shortfall in materials, so she was looking for elastics, to go around your ears, or even shoelaces so that she could make ties for those. So if you have one of those things, and if you can help out with that, please go ahead and let her know. The other thing I want to point out is every once in a while I'll get announcements that come in to be included either in the bulletin that gets mailed out to be included in writing, or something that you'd like me to announce here at the beginning of the video. And if you have those kinds of things, please make sure you give me a call or send me an email no later than Thursday. So that's Thursday, obviously, before the Sunday or the Saturday evenings when we normally send this out, that it's going to be going out, okay? So having gotten those couple little housekeeping matters out of the way, I want to do one other thing that we haven't done previously, and that is to provide an opportunity. And I'm going to, you're going to have to use your pause button as we work our way through here, but I want to provide an opportunity for some of you, and it's been requested that I do this, and I'm happy to make your sitting down to watch this video also a part of your, make the Lord's table a part of doing that. Okay, so I'm going to read from 1 Corinthians chapter 11, a passage many of us will be very familiar with, and what I'll do is ask that at the appropriate times you use your whatever media you're using right now, your computer, your phone or tablet, whatever. You just pause, say a prayer, partake of the fruit of the vine or the bread at the appropriate time. So let me read together with you 1 Corinthians chapter 11, beginning in verse 23, where Paul says, I received from the Lord that which I delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the night when he was betrayed, took bread. And when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way also, he took the cup after supper, saying, This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. What a fitting opportunity it is for us as God's children, as his family, as a church family, to partake of the communion together as a sign of our continued fellowship and unity, even when we're not able to be physically together. And so I'm more than happy to do that, and I will include a short portion like this at the beginning of each video. I'd ask you can pause it now, take time to pray, to do whatever you need to do in preparation, and then we'll move into the lesson. So this week has been an interesting week in the news, and an interesting week as I've talked to various believers about what they're doing and how they're doing it. I've talked to different families about how they're going to take special time this weekend to celebrate Easter. And, there is a certain amount of sadness as I reflect on that. Normally on Good Friday, we'll gather with many other believers for a meeting down in Toronto, regularly referred to as training for service. And it's such an encouragement, it's such a blessing to look forward to. It's often a time when we get to see old friends and family members. My kids would always ask on the way there, are my cousins going to be there? And very often they would be, and they would play. And what a great time, and sort of serves as the unofficial beginning of spring. And in addition to our special time of study and worship, this would be the weekend where all of us would get together and have a big family dinner There'd be ham and turkey and mashed potatoes and everything else you can imagine. And for some of you watching who are highly emotional about this, I won't forget to mention there would also be pie. Now, sadly, we won't be able to observe those fun, exciting celebrations in the same way that we normally do. And of course, in addition to those, what would you call them? Those extra fun things that we do on Easter and, all the chocolate for the kids and all that kind of stuff. This is also a time historically when we know there's significance. All right, because unlike many of the events recorded in the Gospels, we know that the last week of Jesus' life in Jerusalem, as he taught and spent time with his disciples, ultimately on Friday as he was arrested and crucified, and then on Sunday as he rose from the dead, these things form the central events of all human history. And what a blessing that we are fortunate enough to have some historical connection so we know when those things took place. So significant, of course, was Jesus' resurrection on Sunday, that Sunday would become the day of worship from that time forward. And this is a great story. I just love this story. I love the story that they found records from the early church indicating that they thought it was appropriate to change the posture of prayer. And so they should be standing and looking up to heaven. It should be a time of celebration during their Sunday worship, because this was the day that their Lord and ours rose from the grave. And what an encouraging thought that is. And as we contemplate that, perhaps I'm not helping, right? Maybe I'm making it even more frustrating or sorrowful that you're not able to be together with those you love to share those moments with. And truly, when God said that he saw that it was not good for man to be alone, he was right. This is a difficult time, and it's a time that can be challenging for us mentally and emotionally. And so I would urge you to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. If you need help, please don't hesitate to call me. Call a friend, call a neighbor. Make sure that, as we have been doing, and I know many of you have reported to me, that you continue to call and encourage and use technology, Facebook and FaceTime and whatever other method you want to use to get together and meet. Zoom, I suppose, would be the popular one these days. Encourage one another as much as possible, because this can be a time when we especially notice the fact that we're not together with the people we love and that we want to be together with. But let me share some thoughts along these lines. While we are socially distancing and keeping away from one another to avoid spreading infection, and that's important, it's important that we do that. I think it's important as well to remember that we're together in many, many meaningful ways. In fact, our efforts at social distancing are an indication that we care about one another. We stay away because we don't want to spread a harmful infection to the people that we love and that we care about, our friends and neighbors and family members. We're together in that. For Christians, of course, even to a greater extent. As many of you will be watching this video for your Sunday morning worship, I want you to think about a few things. Many families today will be gathering together. They'll be singing songs. They'll be saying prayers. They'll be offering devotionals. I know at our house, it's especially fun because some who wouldn't normally participate get to do so. And I'm sure it's like that at many of your homes as well. Just a few moments ago, we took time to think about the communion, a memorial that reminds us of the sacrifice of our Lord and of the great blessings that we receive in the empowerment that we have from God because of it. But it's also a reminder of our unity, of our togetherness. We call it communion for a reason. And so I hope as you partake, you imagine all the many faithful around the world raising a simple cup and breaking a loaf together in solidarity. I hope when you open your Bibles this morning, you remember that although you're not side by side physically with others who are opening their Bibles, there are brothers and sisters opening their Bibles along with you, finding assurances and encouragement in the same ancient truths. What a beautiful thought to think that even though we may not be able to be together physically, we're together. I mentioned just a moment ago our prayer list and our announcements, and so that's a great tool that we use to together share our prayer concerns, so that while we may not be able to physically stand here and communicate face to face, we are able to share what's going on in one another's lives, and to, most importantly, approach the throne of God with those important things that are on our hearts and on our minds. In Revelation chapter 5 and verse 8, there's this beautiful image of the bowls of incense that represent the prayers of the saints entering heaven. And I can only imagine that those prayers entering heaven with God are just as numerous now as they have ever been. And so once again, we're together in our offering of prayer for one another. We're together in our concern and our love for one another, and are continuing to keep track of what's happening in one another's lives. It's easy, to forget and to feel alone when perhaps, as we've been saying, we're not as alone as we think. Recall in 1 Kings chapter 19, Elijah has just had his showdown with Jezebel, and he's had to run away to save his life, and he's there hiding in a cave. And in despair and frustration, he says, I alone am left. There's no one else, God. I'm in this all by myself. And I have no doubt that that's exactly how he felt. But you see, our feelings are not always an accurate depiction of reality. And so God had to step in and remind Elijah. And so as we think about that, I just want to pause there for a moment. And God tells Elijah that there are 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed the knee to Baal. He reminds him that there are others who are going to take up the cause and continue his work, so that he doesn't have to do it all alone. And as we consider Elijah's distress, because he feels like the majority are against him, I must say, okay, in that assessment, he was correct. Okay, sadly, there were more in Israel who had abandoned their faith and given up on their faithfulness to God. And Elijah should rightly feel sorrowful about that. And so in that sense, I suppose Elijah's distress was accurate. But even then, I might remind us all that has often been the case for God's people. How many times have the faithful found themselves with themselves and God and no one else? Remember, in the book of Numbers, chapter 13, the people of Israel have left Sinai. They've affirmed their faithfulness to God. They've entered into covenant with him. And the very first thing that they need to do is to enter the land that he's promised them, the land of Canaan. And so from Kadesh Barnea, they send 12 spies into the land of Canaan to check it out and to allow them to gain some insights into what's going on. And the 12 spies come back. And 10 out of 12 say to the people, hey, this is too hard. It's too scary. The people are too strong. The cities are too fortified. We can't do it. Only Joshua and Caleb try to convince the people. Only Joshua and Caleb have enough faith in God to say, if God has promised us this, then we can do it. And it's one of those moments where, you imagine in a Hollywood movie, they would give this impassioned speech, and everyone would be rallied to their cause and do the right thing in the end. But that's not what happens. Instead, their countrymen side with the 10 spies who say we shouldn't go in. And the people rebel against God and refuse to take him at his word. Now, I know many of you know the end of the story, that Joshua and Caleb do get to enter the promised land while the others fall in the wilderness. And I understand that it's still better, to serve God. But imagine in that moment, Joshua and Caleb looking at their countrymen and being so disappointed, feeling so alone because they were the only ones. Remember the 4 Hebrew boys, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, alone in Babylon, seeking to be faithful to God and refusing all the comforts and joys of Babylon in favor of faithfulness. Furthermore, 3 of them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refusing to bow. Daniel wasn't there. It was a different situation. And again, how alone they must have felt. And so they're thrown into the fire. And in the fire, we find out they were never really alone. Remember Jesus. At the end of his ministry, he has 120 disciples. 3 years, 120 disciples. Perhaps for some of you who are preachers out there, that's encouraging to know that the best preacher who ever lived didn't build a mega church. Right? But Jesus says to those 120, go into all the world and preach the gospel. And I wonder if, as he said that, they kind of looked around and thought, Jesus, are there more people you're talking to? Because the world's a big place. And there are only a few of us. It's maybe that feeling you get, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this, when you show up to help someone move, and you say, where's everybody else? Right? And yet, from that small beginning, they truly did turn the world upside down. And now, more than ever, we can think of the millions of faithful who have been added to that number of disciples. And it's amazing to think what even a small number, a lonely few, can do when God is with them. And so all of these cases share one thing, and that is, despite being vastly outnumbered in human terms, when God was with them, they were not alone. One last story, please. I just love these Old Testament stories that serve as such perfect examples for the points we're trying to make here. In 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 8 through 23, Elijah, you may recall at that time, is being pursued by the Syrians, and he's holed up in a city called Dothan, and him and his servant are there, and the king of Syria finds out. And so overnight, he sends his army and surrounds the city. You know, this is sort of the standoff. This is the moment at the end of The Mandalorian where, you know, all of the stormtroopers are outside and you just got these few people inside in real trouble. And so we can totally understand when Elijah's servant says, "Alas, my master, what shall we do?" And Elisha famously corrects him. Right? And says, "Those who are with us are greater than those who are with them." You know, I can imagine the servant going, "What are you talking about? There's a whole army out there." And so Elisha prays that his eyes would be opened. And God grants Elisha's request, and the servant's eyes are opened, and he sees the mountain filled with horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. And then he understands, right? I shouldn't have felt so alone. We need to pray that God would open our eyes, that we could see the many faithful Christians serving and worshiping together in heart and in mind. We need to pray that God would open our eyes, that we can see his hand working in our lives, in the lives of those around us, our friends and our neighbors, seeking opportunity to bring them into a relationship with him. That we can see the heavenly hosts praising his name along with his church. Who, while not together in body, is together in spirit. And so our lack of physical connection may seem that much more noticeable this weekend. It's true. But by faith, we can envision the millions of saints across the world expressing their love and devotion and commitment to God and to one another. We can take comfort in the truth that faithfulness is not about having the numbers on our side, but about having the Lord on our side. We can look around and see goodness and beauty in God's plan and his creation and know that he's looking down on us, his children. And so in all of these ways and many more, I pray that we can find encouragement and glean the understanding that really, although sometimes we may feel it, we're not alone.